All right, so, I'll answer any of these questions for you guys as we go. I've got a lot of slides, but I'm going to kind of get through them quickly, or I'll go through them kind of rapidly because I have about 60 of them. But some of them just are things I'm just going to kind of move through quickly. But if you have any questions, by all means, ask me and I'll be willing to answer them. So the talk I'm giving today, the first talk here at Progress Next is what's new in Angular. I am a developer advocate for the Kendo React team, but again, I did work for Tesla building Angular applications and Angular components. And it's been about a year since I think I've shipped Angular code, but I'm still keep really good tabs on Angular. And like I said, been going through all the ngconf videos and trying to figure out kind of what's coming out new and what could I tell you guys about kind of where we've been since last year this time and kind of where we're going in the future. Was anyone here at Progress Next last year? No? A couple of you guys? Good. So one thing I made sure I wasn't going to do was go over any information that you might have heard in a What's New in Angular talk last year while you were here, but I'll cover some of the stuff that's come out in 6 and 7, and then we'll start talking about what you should be looking forward to in 8 and version 9 of Angular. Again, here's my Twitter account if you want to take a picture of that. I'll also have periodic slides throughout the demo that have URLs if you guys want to take a picture of, and at the very end I'll have a URL that's going to have all the links and resources to the stuff I've talked about in the talk. So the agenda, these are going to be the kind of the main headers of each of the different sections of the talk that we'll go through. And you know, it's very basic what's new in Angular stuff. I started working for Progress in September, and one thing I've been doing since I lived here in Orlando and kind of moved out to California and started working for SolarCity and Tesla and eventually Progress is that I've been pushing myself to get out there and try new things, and I would encourage everyone else to do the same thing. If you have an opportunity at your company to give demos or to show other people how things work or to start a meetup, like those are things I would suggest doing, even if it requires stepping outside of your comfort zone, because I feel like that's the best way to kind of push yourself and become successful. If you're not continually pushing yourself, I feel like you're leaving success on the table that you should be taking advantage of. So I always like to start with a slide like this and just say, you know, hey, if you're not doing this kind of stuff, or if you have any questions on how to do these types of things, definitely ask me, and I'd be willing to share any information that I've learned. Where we're going to start out is talking about Angular and what I think makes Angular a very stable ecosystem. And I'm going to give you some examples of why I think other companies, big companies, think that it's also the right product to be using for large-scale enterprise applications, line-of-business applications. Even though I do work for Kendo React and I do a lot of React programming, I'm a big advocate of of Angular, and finding the right tool for the job. So you had a question about, you know, what do I like best, Angular or React? What do you think? What would I tell other people to use? And my answer is to really reflect on what your team is comfortable with. What kind of a background do they come from? Do they come from a .NET background? Do they come from a functional background? These kind of these traits of your team are going to kind of decide which framework you might use, and also the requirements. If it's a huge line of business application for an internal application, I say Angular is probably the right choice. If it's a smaller product, or something where you need to focus very fine grain on each of the components and focus more at a component level, React might be the better of the two. But it's also it's left up for your interpretation. What do you think is actually the best thing? They both do a really good job at building components and building single-page applications. So it's just really up to you. So stability is essential for a thriving Angular ecosystem. And what I mean by this is that if Angular is not stable and doesn't have like a very normal release cadence, something that you can basically bet on every 6 months, then it's going to be very hard to develop applications that use Angular. So predictability is something that you get out of Angular and that you've had out of Angular since the Angular 2 release. So show of hands, who in here has been using Angular since Angular 2, or let's start with AngularJS. Who's used AngularJS back in the day? One, and you used it a little bit, right? Okay, so a few people. What about Angular 2? Okay, so when Angular went from AngularJS to Angular 2, they started referring to Angular as just Angular, but they also did some other things, like they started a typical release cadence, and we'll talk a little bit about that and kind of why that creates stability and why it makes it easier for companies to build Angular applications. So if you want to find out, what the latest version of Angular is, what the latest beta or alpha version of Angular is, you can go to this URL here. Obviously, if you go to GitHub and just click on the Angular, search for Angular, and click on the Releases tab, you're going to be able to see information like this. So this is, I think I took this screenshot last night or maybe the day before, but as you can see, you can see the regular releases right alongside all the beta and the release candidates for Angular 8. As of last night, I think at 3 o'clock in the morning, they still hadn't released Angular 8 yet. I was thinking that they might do something like that because ngConf just happened, but I think what's actually going to happen is they're going to do that closer to the end of May. So look out for Angular 8 by the end of May, and until then, you can go and use one of these release candidates and try and play around with Angular 8 yourself. So I was talking about the Angular release schedule and why it's predictable for companies to, or what makes Angular predictable from a release perspective. So when they started Angular 2, they started this release cadence that you can see here. Every kind of fall and spring, they're doing a new release, and they're bumping the major version. And every single version is compatible with the last one. So that's kind of what I mean with predictability. If you're building a major application at your company, and you have to do scheduled updates and maintenance, it's nice to know when they're going to release something and know that it's always going to be within about a 30-day period. Like, hey, we know that when May starts to roll around, we're going to get a new version. We know that when October starts to roll around, we need to be looking at that new version of Angular. And there's always going to be a lot of communication from the Angular team letting you know exactly what's coming up in the next release. They're very good with that. They're very transparent about this information. Mm-hmm. What's that?
So I just jumped into Angular 6.
Yeah.
Build with it. So now Angular 7 comes out, Angular 8. I think I had a touch of Angular 2. You certainly cannot port from Angular 2 to Angular 6. It's very different.
Yeah. So so you're on Angular 6 now?
Yeah.
So you don't need to worry about porting from Angular 2 then. That's a good thing, right? So what Angular suggests is they have a thing called update.angular.io, and I'll show that slide here in a few minutes. And basically, it's a page where you can go and you can select what version you're on and what version you want to go to, and it will give you steps of exactly what you have to do to update. The thing that I would say, if you're on Angular 6 already, the developer experience hasn't changed a whole lot since then. A lot of the things that have come out have been updates to projects that are associated with Angular, or stuff that's kind of underneath the hood that you don't have to worry a whole lot about. So that's what I would say.
Yes, but you know what you say, you have a predictable release schedule.
Yeah.
Every half year or whatever that is, I have a port to do.
Yep. You don't. Well, the thing is that you don't have to. So what I would say is that kind of check your application, and if you feel that you guys are stable, if nothing's broke, you don't need to fix it, then I would say stay where you are, or maybe try to work in time to do that update every 6 months. I'm actually going to talk about a company who's doing just that. But first off, I want to show you a little bit about kind of how they update their packages. They follow a semantic versioning. They do major releases every 6 months, like we said. Minor versions happen once every month, and patches, weekly if needed. But you have kind of this, right here, this XYZ is basically, you have a major, minor, and patch version. So when you see Angular 7.5.2, it means that they have, they're on the major version 7. They have had 5 minor releases and two patches with it, roughly 2 patches within the last, month or two. So there's a lot of predictability, like I said. They use semantic versioning, and this gives people who use libraries and engineering teams the ability to do updates and scheduled maintenance in a very predictable fashion and kind of know that they have to plan for that stuff. But like I said, you don't have to update. If your application is probably going to run and be fine without updating, and maybe that's something you can put off until the next version bump. But I do think that you really should take time each 6 months, maybe one sprint, to try and get your packages uploaded or updated. This is something that the Angular team shared at NGConf. It's an article written by Air France and KLM. And what they talk about in this article is how they upgraded to Angular 7 in less than a day. Now before that, it had taken them up let's actually go look at it right here. Before that, when they went from 2 to 4, it took them 30 days. It's basically several sprints to figure out what they needed to do to upgrade to Angular 4. Angular 4 was a big bump too. A lot of major changes in Angular 4. But the Angular team since then has tried to minimize the amount of breaking changes and the amount of major changes that happen every major release. So 4 to 5 and 5 to 6, you can see it took them about a week or two to go ahead and update. So they've had to spend a sprint or two on kind of making sure that they get that updated. Now from 6 to 7, they've gotten so good at this that they were able to do the entire update in less than one sprint and actually do it all in one day. There's some good stuff in this article that I like to point out this part here. They say, state of mind, this is the most important thing. The understanding that upgrading frequently is actually important, and the ability to dedicate time for it as part of the development cycle, like we talked about, is very important. Agile at its core means a very simple thing, the ability to change things fast. All the rest is about that goal. If you can't change things fast, including Angular versions, then you're not really agile, no matter what techniques your team is trying to pull off. So what I would say is try to make time for those updates, because it helps you to understand kind of what's changing each time. If you have a smaller application, I bet it's not that hard either. Angular has a lot of tools that are going to help you do these updates. This is I'm going to show this link several times, but there are a lot of links on here that will give you information on how to do the Angular updates. As well, you can just go to update.angular.io. And here you can find information and instructions on kind of what will be required for the update from any version to any other version. Angular suggests that you update from one major version to the next, but if you want to skip one, they're going to try and show you how to do that. And basically, there's a drop down where you can say, hey, I'm on version 5 and I want to go to version 7. And they're going to tell you what you need to do before you actually start running all the commands to update. Then what are the actual steps you're going to need to take to update, and then what you might need to think of after the update. Next.angular.io is where you can always go to see the documentation for the next version of Angular that's coming out. So basically, if you go to the regular angular.io docs, and you just change up here in the header, you change in the address bar, you type in next.angular.io, it's going to take you to the version 8 or whatever's next. So when version 8 comes out, it'll say 8 right here, and if you put in next, it'll jump over to 9 or whateve the alpha or beta is for 9 that's out at that point, and then you'll be able to see the docs for that. So between the update.angular.io and next.angular.io, you're going to have all the information that you need to make sure that you can do a successful update. And the one thing I would say is that if you ever have any problems doing updates, just reach out to someone on the team, like their developer advocate, Stephen Fluen, or one of those guys, and they're going to give you any of the information that you might be missing or that you haven't been able to find in order to make sure that you can do a successful update. They can also give you tips and tricks on how to make sure that your team is doing it efficiently. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit? I mean, the answer is kind of make time for it, like, because it's going to make your team better at working with Angular. There's going to be certain things that you do each update period that you're going to be repeating the next time you do it. You're going to have certain build scripts and things to go and update depending on whether you have one application or many applications running on Angular.
Let's say you use component packages.
Yeah.
And so I've never done it in an update, but we use PrimeNG.
Yeah, so for component packages like PrimeNG, if you're using a lot of those heavily, then my suggestion is to always wait about a month or two after the main release to do your release, because those type of packages, they take a while to get updated to that new version. However, a lot of the projects that are associated with Angular, like the Angular CLI, NX from the guys at Narwhal, these guys are releasing at almost the same rate that Angular is, and right after they get done. So the things that are very close to the Angular ecosystem or to Angular in the ecosystem, they're going to be available pretty much right when the new version comes out. But these component packages like PrimeNG or something like that, or maybe even Kendo for Angular, you might need to wait just a little bit so that you can make sure that package catches up. A lot of them also are backwards compatible, or you're not going to have a problem with a lot of them.
Okay, but you do have to install the latest version of PrimeNG.
Yeah, if you're going to be bumping the version, you're going to be going through, and that's another thing that update.angular.io does, is that they're going to help you to find out they actually have certain commands in the CLI that you can point at any package, and it's going to show you how to update that the most efficient way. So most of the major packages, there's a command, and I didn't put this in my notes, but there are actually Angular CLI commands that are specifically around, I think it's ng update, and then you would do PrimeNG or whatever your package name is, and it will help you to try and update that package for you. It's not always going to work perfectly for every single package out there, but all the main libraries and all the Angular kind of projects out there, they're going to be able to be updated like that very easily. Some of the other keywords that I want to talk about around Angular is momentum. Since Angular 2, Angular has really been keeping the momentum going in the community and through all of their releases, and this is a good thing. Angular gives you the ability to kind of build rich UI and user experiences. They have server-side rendering, progressive web application, code splitting, lazy loading, all of these things, built-in forms, validation and typing. These are all things that are kind of in the core Angular package, that if you work in like React or something, you don't get all that stuff out of the box. So Angular is very opinionated about the things that how they want you to use their framework. And because of that, you have this not only a rich ecosystem, but you also have a lot of built-in features right into React that are going to help you really get started fast and develop rapidly and build really rich UI and UX. There's a website out there called madewithangular.com, and you can see from there some of the other companies that are using Angular, like Microsoft, Xbox, VMware, Delta, Forbes, BMW, Udacity, Royal Caribbean. These are just some of the ones off the top of my head that I know use Angular. And you can go to madewithangular.com and check out kind of what version they're on and see kind of what their website looks like. Most of them you can't use like the Angular dev tools, but I've actually gone on a few of them and they're not actually using the production build, and I've been able to go through and see what all their components are doing. But you can so some of them you can tell what version they're using, some of them you really can't tell they're using Angular. But on madewithangular.com, you can go and kind of see what other big companies are using it, especially if you're trying to convince your company to use Angular for some reason. Maybe you might want to check out this website to be able to tell other people at your company, well, look, these companies are using it, and here's an example of the site that they're building with Angular. So it's a pretty good resource. I like it. Another thing is that Google is dog fooding kind of Angular insanely. They have 600 applications or more that are using Angular. So, they not only use Angular, but they use it on most of their kind of internal and client-facing web applications. And basically, the Angular team is responsible for anything that happens to those internal applications. So as they start bumping those major versions every 6 months, they're testing it against 600 or more different applications that are already working at Google to make sure that by the time they get it out to you, that you've got a very stable release and that there's not going to be a lot of things that are breaking because they've already gone through all the pains of in the first beta version everything looked good until we ran it against all of our applications internally and we found out that the lazy loading had an issue or something. That's not a thing. I'm just saying like they can kind of catch these things very early. When it comes to like Facebook and React, I don't know that Facebook has that many applications that they can test their releases against. But Google does and Angular does. And if they break those applications, guess who is on the hook for it? It's the Angular team. So they have to update just like you guys do, and they do it all before you guys do it. So that's good to know that they're not only dog fooding and using their own Angular application prolifically inside Google, but they're also running into these issues that you're going to run into way ahead of you. Meetups and conferences. This is a big part of the Angular community, and being an Angular developer, I would say if you choose Angular, you're going to have a lot of meetups and conferences that you can go to learn about Angular, and they probably have more meetups than I think any other technology in the Bay Area that I know of. I don't know, like I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I don't think I can find one area of the Bay Area that doesn't have like a nice Angular meetup that I can go and attend each week if I want to. Some of the conferences out there are like NG Atlanta, NG India, Angular NL, which is the Netherlands, NG-Conf in Salt Lake City, which you guys know about, and NG Japan, Berlin. So they've got conferences all over the world. No matter where you're at, there's going to be a big Angular conference that if you want to take your team out to, you can, or if you just want to try and catch meetups. If you're the type of person like me who likes to go out to a lot of meetups and just kind of soak in all the information, you're always going to be able to find something, hopefully, in your area. Also, if you guys have any questions about this, you can always reach out to me or some of the guys on the Angular team, and they'll let you know if there's something in your area that maybe you're not picking up. I used to hold meetups at Tesla, which I was telling you guys about, and this is a picture of me and the Angular team when we were doing a tour of the Tesla factory, because I was bringing all them in each week and having them talk, each month and having them talk to our teams, and so I decided to take them all out. Because we're all in the Bay Area and we're all kind of friends, and it's funny how Angular and the React communities in the Bay Area, they're all just kind of like they're all just JavaScript developers, and they're all very nice and they all kind of work together. And these guys would come out if you asked them to speak at your meetup, and I think that one of the things that you can do at your own company is organize meetups like this, and that'll give you the opportunity to get up and start talking about Angular more, and it's going to help you in your learning, but it's also going to help your coworkers to kind of stay abreast of all the changes that are coming with Angular, and some of the techniques that you can use to work with Angular. So if you have something that you just learned, build a meetup talk around it and host it, or maybe just do a lunch and learn. These are great things that you can be doing at your own company to help you kind of get better at Angular. And hey, if you're in an area where these guys can come out, they'll probably come and talk at your meetup. Partnerships is a big thing. So this is what I was kind of talking about before, is that there's a lot of projects out there that are very close to Angular. Webpack, StackBlitz, Narwhal has NX. RxJS is kind of part of Angular. So RxJS comes when you install Angular. Also, Webpack is kind of part of their build system. It's one of the tools that they use in their build with the Angular CLI. and of course NativeScript. So these are the types of projects that follow very closely to those major updates. Every time that those major updates come through, these guys are right behind them. Whereas, you know, the packages like you were talking about, NG Prime, they might be a little bit further behind. But these ones, you can pretty much bet that as soon as a new version comes out, they're going to be releasing a new version of one of these packages, and possibly even matching that version number, so that you can see, oh, there's a direct correlation between the release of, you know, Narwhal's NX and the actual Angular release that's coming out, you know, next month or something. So here's some of the projects that are also kind of closely tied to Angular, and these ones actually follow exactly the same version numbers as Angular. So they're not like the other package where I showed you, where, you know, they're very close, or they're putting out something right afterwards. But these are like, the Angular console is an extension of the CLI. The Angular CLI is kind of built by the Angular team, and NX is actually something that that follows that. If you look at the version of NX versus the version of Angular, you're going to see a direct correlation. This is kind of the Angular release schedule from version 4 through version 7. And you can see some of the main things that have come out with each of the versions. And notice at the bottom here, the compatibility going backwards. We kind of already been over this, but I just want to show the slide one more time. So what's happened in Angular since Progress Next 2018? That's kind of what I wanted to start talking about. What are some of the things that bring stability to the Angular ecosystem, and kind of what's happened since Angular 6? So here are some of the features that were released, and I'm just going to breeze over these quickly because you probably know about a lot of these features if you've been following Angular. But here's that ng update command I was talking to you about. So if you wanted to update a package, you can run this, and it's going to analyze your package.json and recommend any updates that you need to be able to update to the newer version of that package that'll be compatible with your current version of Angular. They also released things like ng-add, where you can easily add on new capabilities to your projects, like PWA and service workers. And they also have been doing a lot with schematics. Does anyone know what schematics are? Basically, when you're in the Angular CLI and you run ng-add or ng-new or any of these commands, like if you're going to add a component or a module to your project, the thing that's generating that code behind the scenes is Angular schematics. And things like the CLI and Narwhal's NX, they're built on top of this schematic system. So is NativeScript from Progress. You know, I don't think that NativeScript would be as far along as it is, or would be as easy to develop if Angular didn't have something like the schematics for them to sit on top of. So basically, you have all of these basic commands that are part of the Angular CLI, which you can kind of piggyback on top of, and you can incorporate into your scripts. So if I wanted to write a schematic that generates a special kind of component that I want my employees to be able to, or my developers to be able to add very easily to their project, maybe it's authentication or something, I can build a schematic that generates the code needed, and I can also leverage any of the commands that are in the Angular CLI, and they can live right next to each other, and I can build nice little commands that they can run, or maybe even a package that has a whole suite of commands that they can run to generate specific components or modules for my application. And it just makes developing in Angular, it makes Angular extensible. Support for multiple projects. Angular Elements was released back in version 6. The CLI and Material Starter projects, all very cool stuff to go check out. Also, Ivy was announced in version 6. In version 7, some of the features that came out were more, these were more features that are in the Angular ecosystem. The ecosystem, like I said, is very close to the Angular project. So Angular CLI prompts. Angular CLI prompts is whenever you create a new Angular project, Now it's going to ask you, hey, do you want to add routing? Do you want to use LESS or SAS along with your project? And if you answer yes to those questions during that initial setup cycle, it's going to add those things to your project for you. So that was a big update in 7. So that's something, if you upgrade to 7, that you would be seeing new. And it's a huge help to be able to get those prompts when you're setting up a new project, and kind of, because routing, it's not super hard to set up, but if it's already kind of included in there for you, or if you don't need it, it'd be nice to just not have it all set up. Angular budgets kind of help you keep the application size under control. And what happens is you can actually set default minimums and maximums in your Angular package. I think it's called Angular package.json. There's a Angular.json file or something inside your project where you can actually set, if my package size for my projects gets over, 50 megabytes, I want there to be warnings, and I want there to be, actually 50 megabytes would be super huge, like 5 megabytes. If it gets to like 5 megabytes, please warn us. Put warnings in our build so that the build will either fail or give us warnings. So that's pretty cool. Angular console was updated. The Angular console is like the CLI with a UI around it, right? So instead of opening up the terminal and saying, ng-new or ng-new project or ng-add or any of this stuff, you can do it right from a user interface, a graphical user interface. So that's something I would check out if you haven't seen it yet, is the Angular console. The CDK, they added drag and drop support. The CDK is something that you can use if you're building your own component libraries, so that you don't, like, if you use Material, but you've always thought, hey, I'd like to build my own component library that doesn't have all this Material styling, but I want to be able to leverage some of the core things like the backdrop layer and drag and drop and virtual scrolling in my new components, but I don't want it to be, Angular Material. I want it to, so you can pull in the CDK and actually use that as a foundation to build your own UI kits. This is what the Angular update page looks like. So I was telling you, if you want to update, if you're on version 5 and you want to go to 7, you just plop it in here, and it'll give you information on how to do that update. So just really a recap, going from 6 to 7 is pretty straightforward. So if you're on version 6, you want to go to version 7. If you don't have a big app, it's probably going to take you maybe about, I don't know, a day or less to actually get your team to actually complete this upgrade. So I only got about 10 minutes left, so I really want to start talking about Angular 8 and kind of what's coming in the future. So Angular 8 has an opt-in preview of the new rendering engine. They have things like tree shaking and code splitting, which is going to make your overall packages, your project lighter in file size. Also, Angular 8 will be compatible, just like always, with the previous version, Angular 7. Here is kind of what's out there right now when it comes to the betas and the release candidates. And again, in the end of May, we should see an actual final release of Angular 8. One of the things that I would say is that you really shouldn't be concerned too much about the release of Angular 8 and Ivy, because it's an opt-in preview. You don't have to use it. You can continue. By default, it's going to use the old rendering view engine. It's not going to use Ivy unless you want to. The reason why they're releasing this opt-in preview in version 8 is so that you can start to play around with it. So that if you install version 8 and then you switch a flag in it, you can see what it's like using the new rendering engine. And if you don't like it, or if there's a problem, you can just turn that flag off and go back to the old rendering engine. Here's kind of what it looks like whenever you do the ng update. And notice it kind of gives you all this information. The information isn't so much as important as to these different things that I've highlighted here. What do I need to do before I update? What do I need to do during the update? And what I should be thinking about after I update my application? So they've got you covered here. Some of the updates that we're going to be expecting in version 8, again, is the opt-in Ivy preview. Again, the view engine is View engine is the old rendering engine of Angular. Ivy is the new one. And when Ivy's released, it's not going to be a huge change for you as a developer. It's going to be a lot of changes underneath the hood. But just like React released a new Vue engine about a year ago, after that happened, all these new features started coming out over the next year. Same thing's going to happen with Angular. So I would say that by fall of this year, when Angular 9 comes out, Ivy will actually be turned on, and at that point, over the next year, you're going to be seeing a whole lot of new capabilities coming out with Angular that were never possible before, and it's all because of them setting this up and getting Ivy running. Again, you're not going to see these things immediately, they're going to come over time. Smaller bundle sizes, faster rebuild times, improved template type checking, backwards compatibility. No changes required for existing apps. It's just going to work. Some of the things that won't be compatible with Ivy are going to be language services, Angular Universal, and internationalization. So if you're not using any of those things in your projects, you'll probably have zero problems updating to Angular 8 and turning on that Ivy preview. Have faith in the Angular team. They've done this before. They have constant releases, and they have a deprecation policy, which means if things are going to start getting deprecated, they're going to give you guys a lot of warning about that, and they're going to be very transparent about it. Some of the reduction in application size can be from 7 to 20% with Ivy. They're going to be able to determine whether you're using an old browser or a new browser and give you a different bundle based on that, which is going to be more performant or less performant if you're on an old browser. And it's just going to happen automatically. Builders is a big thing that's coming out, and that's something that's going to allow you to deploy directly from the CLI, and it's going to allow you to kind of affect what build tools run in what in kind of what order. And if you think about it, right now you kind of have the CLI, and it runs on this builder right here. So this is kind of deep into the Angular package if you went looking through the ng modules. The idea is that eventually you can use Bazel instead, and Bazel will give you the opportunity to kind of determine when Webpack versus Rollup versus your SaaS dev tools are going to be running and kind of how your project builds. These capabilities aren't available in the current version of the Angular build, but with Bazel you'll be able to do that. Bazel is something that if you're really worried about doing a custom build, you should be looking into Bazel over the next year and figuring out how you can incorporate that into your system. Yeah, so you can orchestrate kind of like the build order and the tools that you can run. It removes limits in the CLI by working. So the CLI is just going to run more efficiently because the Bazel team is now working with the Angular team to give you a better build experience. Let's go ahead and talk about the future of Angular. I skipped over a few slides there because there's a lot of stuff that we've already been talking about. Version 9, we know is going to be coming around fall, right? Angular 8 is about to drop. Version 9 will be right after that. At that point, Ivy will be turned on. It'll be fully backwards compatible with Angular 8, and it's going to enable a lot of future development experiences like I was talking about before. You're not going to see all these crazy developer experiences coming out right then, but they're going to happen over the next year. I wanted to give you this slide one more time if you want to take a picture of it. In this document, I have links to all of the ngconf videos. Everything that I feel that if you're trying to figure out what's new in Angular, what videos do you need to go watch at ngconf? What articles do you need to read? What are some of the release documentation, information about updating Angular, and all that stuff will be in this link. So I'll leave it up here for a second if you want to take a picture of it. Does anyone have any kind of like pressing questions? Do you think I kind of explained kind of what's going on over the last year and kind of what you can look forward to? If you have any questions, let me know. Also, feel free. I'm here the rest of the day. You can pull me aside at any time if you have questions about Angular, building components. If you want to talk about React, I can talk about that also. But that's pretty much my talk. Again, my name's Eric. I'm the developer advocate for the Kendo React team. You can reach me on Twitter here. You can stop me in the hallway and talk to me. And if you'd like to attend any of my other talks, I'm going to be talking about React and state management specifically in React. And most of this is geared around hooks in React. Yep. And that'll be tomorrow at 11 p.m. And then I have one the day after, which is more of an advanced talk. So this will be a kind of an intro into React and hooks. And then the next day we'll have like a little bit more of an advanced session. And that'll have a lot more coding and demos. And you'll be able to, some of the things I'll be highlighting is kind of how easy it is to get into React and just start spinning up applications and working with state management and building components, which, by the way, all of those things are very easy to do in Angular as well. Yeah, that's it. Thank you guys very much. Again, grab me after the session if you want to. Ask me any questions, and I'll be here, until Friday. Thanks a lot, guys.